You're walking down a busy street. It's an ordinary afternoon. People are coming toward you from the other direction, a steady river of strangers, and your brain barely registers any of them. A man in a gray jacket talking on his phone, a woman pulling a small suitcase, a teenager with headphones who doesn't look up. You pass maybe 40 of them in a single minute, and not one of them means anything to you. They're not your family. They're not your friends. They're just people. Background. Noise. But here's the thing I want you to do. Pick one of them. Anyone. The man in the gray jacket. Look at him for a second and tell yourself, out loud if you have to, that person is my relative. It sounds insane, right? You've never seen him before. You don't share a last name, a country, a face, a single memory. And yet, if you go back far enough, the math says you're cousins. Not cousins in some soft, poetic, we're all one big family way. Cousins in the literal, traceable, blood and DNA way. And not just you and him. You and that woman with the suitcase. You and the teenager with the headphones. You and every single person on that street, in that city, on that whole continent. That feels like it can't be true. It feels like the kind of thing a guru says to make you feel warm inside. But it's not warm and fuzzy at all. It's cold, hard arithmetic, and once you see how the numbers work, you can't unsee it. So today we're going to walk all the way down this rabbit hole, room by room, until we hit something at the bottom that genuinely doesn't feel real. Let's go. Let's start with the simplest possible question. How many ancestors do you have? You have 2 parents. Easy. Each of them had 2 parents, so that's 4 grandparents. Each of those had 2 parents, so 8 great-grandparents. You can feel where this is going. Every step back in time, the number doubles. 1632, 64. Go back 10 generations, which is only about 300 years, roughly to the early 1700s, and the math says you have 1,024 direct ancestors alive at that time. All of them making their own babies. Who made babies? Who eventually made you. That's already a lot of people. But the doubling doesn't stop. Go back 20 generations, around 600 years, and the number is over 1 million. 20 generations. That's roughly back to the 1400s. 1 million people, all of whom had to exist in the right place, at the right time, and survive long enough to have a child, or you would simply not be here. Now keep going. Go back 30 generations, somewhere around the year 1100, the time of medieval castles and knights. The doubling math now says you should have over 1 billion direct ancestors. Just you. One single person, supposedly produced by more than 1 billion specific individuals, all alive at the same moment. And here's where the whole thing breaks. Because around the year 1100, there were not 1 billion people on the entire planet. There were only about 300 million human beings alive in the whole world. So you cannot possibly have had 1 billion separate ancestors. The number is bigger than the entire human population at the time. Something is very wrong with our math. Except the math isn't wrong, the math is fine. What's wrong is the hidden assumption underneath it. We assumed that every one of those ancestors was a different person, and that, it turns out, is impossible. Think about what that actually means. If you'd need 1 billion ancestors but only 300 million people existed, then the same people have to be filling multiple spots on your family tree. The same great-great-great-grandmother is showing up not once, but dozens of times, on different branches, because the branches secretly loop back and connect to each other. Your family tree isn't really a tree at all. A tree keeps splitting outward forever, getting wider and wider. Your real ancestry does the opposite. Go back far enough and it stops spreading out and starts folding back in on itself, the branches weaving together like a net. Scientists have a wonderfully blunt name for this. They call it pedigree collapse. Your neat, ever-widening family tree collapses inward, because there simply aren't enough humans in the past to keep it growing. And the deeper you go, the harder it folds. Let me make this less abstract because right now it's just big numbers. Imagine a small village, 400 years ago, somewhere in the countryside. Maybe 200 people live there. Travel is slow and rare. Most people are born, married, and buried within a few miles of the same church. So who do they marry? Each other. Not their own brother or sister. Nothing like that. But the boy. 3 houses down, his grandmother and your grandmother were sisters. You don't know that. Nobody tracks it. But it means the man you marry is already, quietly, your distant cousin. And your children's family tree, going up, has the same ancestors appearing on the husband's side and the wife's side at the same time. This wasn't a weird situation. For almost all of human history, this was just normal life. People didn't move much. The pool of possible partners was small, so the folding in happened constantly, in every village, in every generation, all over the world. Your ancestry isn't a clean tree. It's a tangled web, and the tangles are everywhere. Okay, so your family tree folds in on itself. Interesting. Maybe a little unsettling. But how do we get from you're secretly related to the boy in your great-great-grandmother's village to you're related to that stranger on the street from a totally different country? Those feel like very different claims. The village makes sense. The whole planet does not. To cross that gap, we need to bring in a person who actually did the math. In the year 2004, a researcher named Douglas Rohde, working with a couple of colleagues, decided to stop hand-waving and build a real model. They didn't just guess, they built a computer simulation of the whole human population across thousands of years. They filled it with virtual people. They had those people live in real places on real continents. They let them be born, move around a little, fall in love, have children, and die. And crucially, they made them mostly stay near home, the way real humans do. But they let a small number of them travel, the way real humans also do. A trader crossing a sea, a soldier marching to a distant land, a single family climbing over a mountain range into the next valley. Then they ran the clock and watched. They were looking for one specific moment in the past. The moment when, if you go back far enough, every single person alive at that time who left any descendants at all is an ancestor of every single person alive today. The point where the whole tangled web connects into one. And what they found genuinely stunned a lot of people. That moment is not 100,000 years ago. It's not even 10,000 years ago. According to their model, the most recent common ancestor of every human alive today, the most recent single person from whom all of us descend, lived only a few thousand years ago. Somewhere, very roughly, around 3,000 years ago. That's it. That's the time of ancient Egypt still building monuments, the time the first parts of the Bible were being written down, not the dawn of humanity, recent history. I want to be careful and honest here, the way a good friend would be, because this number gets exaggerated constantly online. This is a mathematical model, not a discovered skeleton. The exact date shifts depending on the assumptions you feed in, and serious researchers argue about it. But the core finding holds up, and it's been checked from several directions. The common ancestor of all living humans is shockingly recent. We're talking thousands of years, not millions. The friendly old man you imagine at the root of the human family didn't live in some unreachable prehistoric fog. He or she lived closer to written history than to the cavemen. Now let me show you the single piece of this puzzle that does the most work, because without it, none of the rest holds together. The whole thing depends on travelers, on the rare person who crosses the barrier. Picture the world as a set of separate pools of people, a pool in Europe, a pool in Asia, a pool in Africa, a pool in the Americas, on the far side of a giant ocean. For most of history, these pools mixed slowly inside themselves but barely touched each other. So you'd think they'd stay separate family trees forever, right? Europe's web and Asia's web, never connecting. But they're not actually sealed. They leak. Every few generations, somebody crosses. One sailor on one ship reaches a port he's never seen, has a child there, and goes home or never goes home. It doesn't matter. Because that one child is now a doorway. That child grows up local, marries a local person, and has local children. And those children are now linked by blood both to the new land and to the sailor's distant homeland. Their descendants spread out into the local population over the centuries, and they carry that hidden link with them. Here's the part your gut refuses to believe. It only takes a tiny trickle. You don't need waves of migrants, you need one successful traveler every so often, and given enough centuries, that single thread gets pulled through the entire fabric. A few hundred years later, the sailor isn't the ancestor of a few people in that port. Through all the marrying and mixing, he's an ancestor of nearly everyone on that whole side of the world. One person walks through one door, and 1,000 years later, he's woven into millions. That's why isolated places matter so much in this story, and they're the honest exception. A community that truly never had a single visitor, ever for thousands of years, would stay outside the web. But here's what the real history shows us. Almost nowhere stayed that sealed. We keep finding evidence of contact in places we assumed were cut off. Tools that traveled, crops that show up on islands they shouldn't be on, DNA in remote populations that points back to a faraway homeland. People moved, people always moved. Curiosity, hunger, war, trade, love, accident. Humans are the animal that does not stay put. And every one of those journeys, even a single canoe blown off course, was another thread tying the web tighter. Let's stack one more floor onto this, because there's a second number that's even stranger than the first, and most people have never heard it. We just talked about the most recent person who is an ancestor of everyone. But there's a different, deeper line in the sand. Go back a bit further, and you reach a point where every single person alive at that time falls into one of only two groups. Either they are an ancestor of every human alive today, or they are an ancestor of no one alive today, because their particular line of descendants eventually hit a dead end and stopped. There is no in-between. No one back then is the ancestor of just some of us. Sit with that for a second because it's wild. According to these models, if you could travel back a few thousand more years and meet a random person in that era who has any living descendants at all, then they are automatically your ancestor. And mine. And the ancestor of that stranger on the street, and the ancestor of a farmer in a country you've never visited, and a fisherman on an island on the other side of the planet. Everyone. There's no club, there's no special bloodline. Either your descendants died out entirely or they became everybody. This means something genuinely strange about the famous people in history books. If a king who lived 3,000 years ago has any unbroken line of descendants reaching today, then he is the direct ancestor of every person now alive. And so is the servant who emptied his chamber pot, as long as that servant also has any living descendants. The grand bloodlines people brag about, the royal ancestry, the "we descend from emperors" stories, are technically true, but they're true for everyone. You descend from the emperors. You also descend from the beggars at the palace gate. The whole idea of a special, exclusive ancestry quietly dissolves. We all share the same ancestors. We just remember different ones. Now I want to slow down, because we've been swimming in numbers and models, and I don't want you to miss the moment this stops being math and starts being about people. There's a quiet, almost unbearable truth hiding inside all of this, and it's the reason it matters at all. Think about who is not in your family tree. There were people alive 3,000 years ago, real people with real lives, who laughed and worried and loved their children, whose lines simply stopped. Somewhere down the centuries, a child died young, or a couple never had children, or a whole family was lost, and that thread of humanity just ended. They are nobody's ancestor now. They're gone in the most complete way a person can be gone. And then there's the other group, the ones who, against staggering odds, became everyone. Not because they were kings, not because they were strong or rich or remembered. Most of them were utterly ordinary people whose names are lost forever, who never imagined that anyone would think of them, ever again. And here you are, thinking of them. You exist because of a specific woman who hauled water up a hill 4,000 years ago in a place you couldn't find on a map. You exist because of a man who survived a winter he should not have survived. You don't know their faces. You never will. But you are the living proof that they made it. And here's the part that turns the whole thing over. That stranger on the street, the man in the gray jacket talking on his phone, the one you decided to call your relative as a joke, he is carrying the exact same hidden ancestors as you. Some of the very people who had to survive for you to be born are the same people who had to survive for him to be born. You and that stranger are not connected by a metaphor. You're connected by actual, specific human beings who lived and struggled and did not give up, and who would have no idea that the two of you, thousands of years later, would brush past each other on a sidewalk without a second glance. Let me give you the version of this you can almost see. Scientists who study our DNA can read the faint trail our ancestors left inside us, and the trail backs up the math in a humbling way. When researchers compare the genes of people from completely different corners of the world, the differences are astonishingly small. Two people from opposite ends of the earth who look nothing alike are more genetically similar than two chimpanzees living in neighboring forests. We are, in the words a geneticist might use, a remarkably young and remarkably mixed species. We haven't been apart long enough or stayed apart cleanly enough to become true strangers. The mixing in the math shows up as mixing in the blood. There's one more idea I have to mention because it sounds like a contradiction, and it isn't. Sharing an ancestor with someone doesn't mean you inherited any DNA from that ancestor. This is the part that breaks people's brains. So let me say it plainly. Genealogy and genetics are two different webs. Your family tree of ancestors grows so enormous, so fast, that going back just 1,000 years or so, you have more slots for ancestors than you have pieces of DNA to inherit. Which means most of your distant ancestors gave you exactly 0 genes. They are your ancestors, fully and truly, by the family tree. But none of their DNA made it down to you. The genetic thread snapped somewhere along the way, even though the ancestry line is solid. So when I say you're related to that stranger, I mean it in the deepest, most documented way. You sit on the same tangled web of human descent. You share the same recent common ancestors. The fact that you don't share their genes anymore doesn't make the relationship fake. It just makes it quieter than you'd expect. The blood relation is real. The blood itself just got diluted, generation after generation, until it disappeared, the way a single drop of dye disappears into an ocean, but the ocean is still, technically, dyed. Let me try to give you the whole shape of it in one picture. Imagine all of human history as a single enormous braid. Way down at the bottom, far in the past, the strands are all tightly wound together, almost a single rope. That's our shared origin, our common ancestors, the small group everyone descends from. Then, moving up through time, the braid loosens and spreads. Strands fan out across continents. They seem to separate to become different peoples, different nations, different faces. It looks, for a while, like the strands have nothing to do with each other. But they never actually let go. Every so often, a strand from one side crosses over and weaves into a strand on the other side. A traveler, a marriage across a border, a single ship. And those crossings happen again and again, century after century, quietly stitching the whole braid together even as it appears to spread apart. So when you look at the top of the braid, at us, at right now, at that crowded street, it looks like a chaos of unrelated strangers. But you're looking at the loose end of one single braid that was tightly bound at the bottom and never truly came undone in the middle. We feel separate. We are not separate. We are the frayed-looking top of one continuous thing. And the most beautiful part, the part I keep coming back to, is how recent it all is. We tend to imagine our shared ancestry as something impossibly ancient, hidden in a fog we can never reach. But the common ancestors of everyone in that street didn't live in some unreachable prehistoric dream. By these models, they lived within recorded history, within the span of stories we've actually written down, close enough that if our memories were just a little better, we might remember their names. So, back to the street. Back to the ordinary afternoon. The river of strangers. The man in the gray jacket on his phone. Earlier, calling him your relative felt like a joke, or a stretch, or a feel-good slogan that doesn't survive contact with reality. Look at him again now. He really is your relative, not as a metaphor, as a fact, written in numbers that don't care how it makes you feel. Somewhere, a few thousand years back, the same person had to survive, had to have a child, had to keep the thread from breaking, so that both of you could exist and walk past each other on this exact sidewalk. Today, without knowing it, the woman with the suitcase, the teenager with the headphones who never looks up, the stranger you'll pass tomorrow whose face you won't even remember. Every one of them. The street isn't full of strangers. It never was. It's a family reunion so enormous that nobody recognizes anybody, a gathering of cousins who have completely forgotten how they're related, all of them descended from the same small group of forgotten people who somehow held on. You spend your whole life feeling like one separate person, surrounded by other separate people. And the quiet, astonishing truth is that there's no such thing as a stranger. There never was. There's only family you haven't traced yet. So the next time you pass someone on the street and feel absolutely nothing, that flat, automatic nothing we feel for the people we don't know, maybe let one small, ridiculous, completely true thought sneak in. Hi, it's been a few thousand years. Good to see you made it too.